All right, so Eddie Hearn in a recent IFL interview was talking about the comeback of Anthony Joshua, and it's going to be in 2025, obviously, and Anthony Joshua will likely fight twice next year. Now, the names he chucked out there were Daniel Dubois and Tyson Fury. All right, now, I'll go into more depth on those two, but he also said that there is the possibility that Anthony Joshua could have an in-between fight. Now, personally for me, and I've said this, pretty much after he lost to Daniel Dubois, probably the best thing for Joshua now at this point is to just call it a day. Because that loss he suffered to Daniel Dubois, it was everything about that fight. I mean, from the opening bell, you could tell he was in trouble. He was stunned, early on in the fight before he was ultimately dropped. Technical flaws were just there for all to see. And he got, I think the second round was the only round he didn't touch down in. I mean, he was battered from pillar to post and he was damn near knocked out cold. So and you're talking about a guy, how old is Joshua now? 35? Thereabouts, 35, 36? He's in his mid-30s anyway. That right there is gonna, it's added miles to the clock. It's gonna take some serious coming back from. And when Anthony Joshua lost to Ruiz back in 2019, 5.5 years ago, he was younger, he was fresher, and he didn't take as much of a beating as he did in this fight against Dubois. And you've seen it, how gun shy he was in the rematch. He's still probably living with the after effects of that loss now. Well, God help him how he's going to recover from that Dubois loss. I mean, he took an even bigger beating. He was knocked out even more decisively. I mean, with Ruiz, he was just dropped. Well, he was hurt several times. He was dropped a couple of times, but he was stopped standing. With Dubois, it was a clean KO. You could never have beaten that count in a million years. And yeah, that's going to take some serious coming back from him. He couldn't do it against Ruiz in terms of comeback mentally. He came back obviously physically in the rematch and he beat him. Mentally, I mean, no. Coming back from that in your mid-30s, and that's going to add so many miles to the clock. I just don't see it. I just don't see how you come back from that. But Eddie Hearn is saying he wants him to come back next year, wants him to have 2 fights, and potentially is going to have an in-between fight before looking to challenge a Dubois or a Tyson Fury. Listen, the only real fights I would be looking at for Anthony Joshua if he was looking to take a comeback serious would be probably a fight with Deontay Wilder or a fight with Dillian Whyte, because I think that both of those fights are winnable, especially the Dillian Whyte fight. The Wilder fight, yeah, look, I would make Joshua favourite, although, both of them, both were knocked out in the 5th round in their respective last fights. Joshua took more of a beating than Wilder. Wilder wasn't dropped multiple times. He was just, he looked away from the referee and Zhilei Zhang, absolutely, that's the fastest I've ever seen him move, sprinted across the ring and, knocked him out brutally. Both were hard, horrible knockouts, but he didn't take the beating that Joshua did. He wasn't really competitive like Joshua wasn't, but he didn't take the beating that Joshua did. Problem with Wilder is he's just, he's not letting that right hand go. He's just got no fire in him anymore. Could he get that against Joshua? If he did, then it's an interesting fight. Whereas Dillian Whyte, a shot to bits Anthony Joshua is probably not as shot as Dillian Whyte at this point in his career now. So they're the 2 fights I would have for him if he was to have a comeback. When Eddie Hearn mentions the likes of Dubois and the likes of Fury, well, you can tell by the way Eddie Hearn is speaking, the Fury fight is the preference. And I don't blame him for the Fury fight being the preference, because it's probably worth still more, even though they're coming off the back of losses, and Fury back-to-back losses, it's probably still more lucrative to have them 2 meet. Now, you have to understand, for people like myself and the viewers watching, the allure of that fight was at its peak when both guys were champions and Fury was undefeated. Joshua only had the 1 loss. That was peak. And I think that if they did the fight then, it would have done insane numbers. I mean, absolutely into the stratosphere. I think that if Anthony Joshua had beaten Daniel Dubois and Tyson Fury had beaten Alexander Usyk again, although they would have, both had losses at that point, Fury would have had the 1 and Joshua would have had the Usyk losses, it still would have done great numbers because it would have had title implications, undisputed, etc. It would have still had a lot going. Now, they're both coming off the back of defeats. They're both coming near the end of their respective careers. And I think at least for people like myself, the viewers here watching, it's lost that allure. It definitely has. It's kind of got the Amir Khan kind of Kell Brook feel to it. On a grander stage, of course, but it still has that feel to it. Having said that, that fight, Amir Khan Kell Brook did very well. And the casuals, I don't even think they'd care that Joshua got knocked out by Dubois and that Fury lost back-to-back to Alexander Usyk. They would just see Joshua, Fury, and then they'd lap it up. I mean, at the end of the day, this fight isn't even for who's the best British heavyweight now. It's not for a world title. It's not for who's the best heavyweight in Britain. It's Daniel Dubois, no questions there. And, it's lost all that. Or at the very least, you could say, well, maybe Fury is still the best in Britain because, at least he did better against Usyk than Dubois did. Fair point. But Joshua is not the second best heavyweight in Britain. So, there you go. So for me, it's lost a lot of its luster. But again, I think that the casual audience would still lap it up. And Eddie Hearn is saying it's still the biggest fight in boxing. I don't even know if it's that anymore at this point. But I get where he's coming from. That's a fight that he wants to make. It's probably a more winnable fight for Anthony Joshua at this point than the Dubois fight. Because if he goes in there again with Dubois, which I still really don't understand how Joshua, as a voluntary challenger, and he gets knocked out devastatingly in 5 rounds, where he won probably 10 seconds of the whole fight, can just get, rematch, boom. It's something in boxing that's been happening a lot lately, and I don't like it. I understand the champion having a rematch clause for a voluntary defense. I get that. That's standard practice. It's always been that way. But, a voluntary challenger getting all these, I don't like it. I also don't like fighters who, and this would have probably been the case when Anthony Joshua had Fury won, coming off the back of a loss, and sometimes even a devastating loss. Nick Ball is fighting TJ Dehaney. TJ Dehaney had moments against Naoya Inoue, but he was ultimately taken out and, broke down and stopped. He's getting a world title crack off the back of that. It's absolutely, I don't like that. I really don't like that. I'd understand it if it was a controversial loss, fair enough. Makes sense. But a devastating loss, really? What? No. And they would have done that. Because Eddie Hearn was mentioning, wait till May, see what happens. Wait till Fury Usyk is over, see what happens. It's like, nah, mate, you lost. You got to rebuild. That's as simple as you got to rebuild. So that's what Eddie Hearn is talking about. Listen, we need to see what Fury does next. They're not going to do a trilogy fight with Alexander Usyk. That's not going to happen. Fury will probably look at Anthony Joshua and think, do you know what? I've lost twice to, well, he probably won't be thinking I've lost twice to Alexander. He's probably still trying to tell himself he won. But he'll probably think, well, I beat Alexander Usyk in my head, and you couldn't. I did better against him than you did. So, yeah, I fancy fighting Anthony Joshua. And given the fact that Fury's only lost on points, he was nearly knocked out, but he wasn't in the first fight. And Joshua was devastatingly knocked out against Dubois. Fury probably look at that fight and fancy it. Anthony Joshua, I would imagine he probably would still fancy the Fury fight. There's that rivalry there. There's that needle still there. I know when Joshua sparred Fury way back when, I think he hadn't even gone to London 2012 at the time. A lot of people said that Joshua did well, so he'll think, well, that was then, this is now. I do think, if I'm not very much mistaken, people were saying Fury wasn't in the best shape back then. That's 2011, I think it was. So it's a long time ago. So, yeah, I think Joshua would still fancy that. And like I said, for the people like myself, the viewers watching, probably wouldn't really... Look, I'd still do videos on it. I'd still cover it. I'd still do a watch-along, etc. But it wouldn't pull at my, boxing heartstrings the way Fury Usyk both fights did. Certainly not. At this point, anyway. The casual audience, yeah, I'd say the casuals would love it. So it would still... Look, it wouldn't do the kind of numbers that it would have done in 21 or that it would have done had both guys won their respective last fights. But it will still do very, very good numbers, and everyone will leave quite a bit richer than they did going into it. Not to say they're not already rich, they are. But I think that's the route that they're looking to go down. But at the end of the day, we need to see how Joshua's looking. And if he does have a comeback fight, listen, it needs to be at a very, very low level. Like, it needs to be a Dylan White, a Gerald Washington, someone like that, because God only knows how Joshua's going to look following on from that. Especially a knockout as bad as that. God only knows. He is probably going to look as jittery as hell when he steps foot back in that ring. He is going to be so gun shy, and he's going to look so jittery. you're not going to want to take any risk. That's why if they went straight in and they did a Dubois rematch or they did the Fury fight, I'd be picking both of those guys to win by knockout early. Dubois would win probably even earlier than he did the first time. Like, I mean, early. And I'd be taking, look, if they made Joshua Fury next, Fury by knockout. Because I think Fury showed me that he still has enough left. He still has enough left to, listen, if Usyk retires, which I think he should, and those belts get vacated and they get fragmented, Fury picks one of them up, in my opinion. He picks one of them up. Now, you would hope that they would match him sufficiently hard enough that, it's not a case of here's a candy from a baby, Fury can fight for the WBC vacant title against number 15, that sort of way. I hope they wouldn't do that. But, I would take Fury over some of these guys. I would. I mean, from what he did there against Usyk both times, although he was soundly beaten, he has enough left in the tank to, beat some of these guys in the top 10. With Joshua, I mean, I don't think he does. I mean, you could run into an easy touch, yeah, and pick up a vacant title. Yeah, you could do that, but I don't see it. I don't see it. I know Hatman was saying that he would take Moses Atelma to beat Anthony Joshua by knockout at this point. I don't know necessarily if I'd go that far because Atelma is a prodigy. He really is. But, I mean, I don't know. I think that experience factor, although Joshua would look jittery as hell, that experience factor would play a big factor. It'd have to. But, I mean, that's where we're at with Joshua in his career. That we're looking at a 19, I think he's 20 now, but we're looking at a 20-year-old prospect. And we're saying, with people saying, and people who I respect opinion very much, saying, yeah, I'd take a tail more over Joshua at this point. Yikes. That is that shows where we're at. So, Eddie Hearn saying he'll come back twice next year. Preferably, I think he wants the Fury fight. If he takes a rehabilitation fight, a comeback fight, they are going to want to go low, because I guarantee you he is going to look horrible in that comeback fight. He is going to have demons galore from that Dubois fight. So they want to be very careful, because the last thing you want to do is say Fury wants to wait until kind of autumn time next year, fair enough. If you put him out there, say in March or April, just for a run out, and you match him too tough too soon, man, you are really going to upset the apple cart then. And if he loses again before he's fought Fury or Dubois, there's no salvage in that. There really isn't. So you're going to want to make sure you are super careful picking his comeback fights. And matchmaking with Matchroom hasn't been great lately, has it not? So yeah, let's wait and see. Let's watch the space. So Joshua will come back next year. Let's see what we make of it. Let's see what he does. I'll leave it there. Hope you enjoyed it. Smash the like button if you could. Subscribe if you haven't already. Until next time, people. Peace.